dear Prorector, dear members of the Corona, dear colleagues, friends, and online viewers. Thank you so much for joining us today. In the next 15 minutes, I will present the summary and conclusions of my thesis on the motivational effects of grading in higher education. So let me begin by introducing my topic and providing some motivation. So why should we study the grading effects? Well, the academic grading is a common assessment tool in higher education with an almost millennial history. So as educators, we apply grades to our students all the time, and we can think about them as a cheap and powerful educational tool that can help us assess student learning and also provide them with feedback and also hopefully to motivate them. But the big problem remains, do we actually know how it works? How do these grades that we give our students all the time motivate our students, or maybe even demotivate them? This problem is aggravated by the huge context dependence of grading. There is a lot of diversity in grading practices in different countries, in different institutions, and also in the same classroom, the same teacher can sometimes apply different academic standards to different students. So how do we approach such a complicated problem? I suggest that we can look at it from the student's perspective, so that all the diversity of grading methods can be boiled down to the notion of the perceived academic standard, which basically answers the question of how hard does it seem to the student to earn a particular grade. And in this dissertation, I study the effects of the perceived academic standard on the student's motivation and effort. So my thesis consists of three main chapters. In the first chapter, I provide some preliminary evidence on the existence of marginal grading effects. In the second chapter, I introduce my theoretical model, and in the third chapter, I test it in a lab experiment. So the first chapter is devoted to an empirical study. I collect and analyze data from a European university. The data cover 11 academic years, several thousand master's students' records, and the university uses an American grading system. A particular feature is that the current grade point averages are reported to the student continuously as rounded to 2 decimal digits. And this feature provides us with this rounding as a source of exogenous variation. And I use it to estimate Euler's regressions of the impact of first period GPA on the students' further learning outcomes. So essentially, I compare the students with first period GPAs rounded upwards versus downwards. So it's a purely exploratory study. So I'm basically trying to find if any effect shows up at all. And the results show that the students were generally not sensitive to this tiny GPA rounding shock. However, some of the competitive international males might have been affected. In particular, after a less favorable GPA rounding, the top international males were less likely to enroll in an optional course. And also the international males with an initial GPA in the merit range, which is somewhat lower, were also less likely to slack off on their subsequent learning outcomes, such as grades and thesis. So these are two signs of, the first sign is the sign of the loss aversion, and the second sign is the sign of the negative marginal grading effect, which essentially says that the higher the grades in the first period, maybe the lower will be the effort in the second period. And I also find no effect on females or domestic students. So the main limitation of this study is the data mining issue, because I ran so many regressions and the study was not pre-registered, so the results are only preliminary and require a further reanalysis. So in the second chapter, I build a theoretical model. So first, I review the theoretical concepts and empirical findings from the economic and psychological literature on grading effects. Then, based on all the evidence I had, I built a simple two-period behavioral model of student effort in a grade-minded environment. So in my model, the student is assumed to be purely extrinsically motivated. So they need to achieve a certain GPA. So basically, this model is built on the presumption of the crowding out of intrinsic motivation, which means that once we introduce extrinsic incentives, we can forget about intrinsic motivation because it must be essentially gone. So the utility function of the student includes two goods. So the student cares about leisure and grades. And the students can differ in their grade targets, in the value they attach to grades, in their self-beliefs and attributional styles or mindsets. So based on the first results that the students get, they can adjust their self-beliefs and grade targets for the second period. How do they do that? They apply their mindset. A mindset is a concept from psychology, and here we talk about a fixed versus growth mindset. So the student with a fixed mindset believes that their results are predetermined by some fixed trait, such as ability or intelligence, and the student with a growth mindset believes that their results hugely depend on their effort or their chosen learning strategy. So the model provides several implications that are further tested in Chapter 3 in a lab experiment. So on this graph, we can see the causal impact of the first period grades on the students' second period effort. And this graph depicts behavior of two students. The blue graph depicts behavior of a student with a growth mindset, and the black graph of the student with a fixed mindset. So let's start from the bliss point, which is somewhere almost in the middle of this graph, which is the point where the student with a grade target of G capital applies commensurate effort in the first period to reach it, and they actually reach it. So they get the grade that they wanted. Then what happens in the second period? The model predicts that regardless of the mindset, the student will exert similar effort in the second period to again achieve this grade target. Now, what happens when the effort, when the initial grade somewhat deviates from the grade target? What happens is that the marginal negative grading effect kicks in, which is the negative slope of these two graphs, which says that the higher the grades that we give to our students for the same performance, usually the lower will be their effort afterwards. So, so what should we do as educators? Should we give our students low and lower grades? Well, when we start doing that, then at first the students might boost their effort, but only to a certain point. So at some point, the student with a fixed mindset will give up because they will not believe that, that with such low results, they have any ability to succeed in this program. So they will maybe drop out. Then the student with a growth mindset is more resilient. So they will provide more and more effort, but again, only to a certain point. So at some very low initial grade, they will also give up because they will not believe they can catch up with their grade target, even with maximum effort. So, so the model essentially predicts that the lower is the extremely low grades that we give to our students, the more students will be giving up. Now, what happens when we give our students very high initial grades? Let's look at the right-hand side of this graph. When we are very generous in grading, we can see on this graph that the students will slack off. And even the student with a growth mindset, who is more resilient compared to the student with a fixed mindset, even they eventually will stop learning because they don't have to exert any more effort to prepare for the second exam, because their grade surplus is so high that they will achieve their target GPA even with no effort. And again, the more extremely high grades we give to our students, the more students will stop learning. That's the model prediction. So I tested these model predictions in a lab experiment with Maastricht University students. And in this experiment simulates a high stakes learning environment with 2 study periods and with costly training. So the students can buy training to prepare for their exams. So there are 2 exams and there are monetary rewards that are promised for achieving a passing level of GPA of 6 out of 10. And the raw grades are randomly assigned to be rounded upwards versus downwards to provide a source of exogenous variation. So what do the results tell us? The results show that the data mostly support the model, so that the students do tend to adjust their effort based on their initial based on their initial grades. So in particular, if they just passed, we remember that bliss point on the graph, they didn't tend to dramatically deviate from their initial effort. Also, the negative marginal grading effect shows up somewhat, so that the marginally higher grades resulted in lower further effort, more slacking off, or less training that was bought. and lower memorization effort. Also, extreme grades tended to be demotivating to the students. So I saw in the data a sharp increase in withdrawal rates when the grades become more and more extreme. And also a fixed mindset showed to be detrimental to learning, both after a failure and also after an unexpected success. The students with a fixed mindset exerted less effort compared to students with a growth mindset. However, the data also show that extrinsic motivation alone cannot explain all the student effort, as the students tended to spend too much time on training. So the presumption of crowding out of intrinsic motivation by the grading incentives doesn't actually hold, and intrinsic motivation needs to be somehow taken into account. The main limitations of this study is the small sample size, especially in the grade calibrating pilot, which resulted in a skewed grade distribution, which resulted in tiny subsamples. And also the mindset and motivation of the students need to be assessed using psychometric instruments with established validity and reliability, and also hypotheses need to be pre-registered beforehand so that we can again avoid the data mining issues. So to conclude, my studies suggest that in a grade-minded environment, the grading effects can work through the student's grade target, grade value, self-efficacy beliefs, and mindsets. The students can adjust their effort depending on the grades they desire, anticipate, and receive, and even the smallest differences in grading can sometimes affect student motivation. Also, what matters is the student's perception of the grading standard, not necessarily our educators' perception. So we as educators might perceive our standards as lenient, whereas the student might already perceive it as unreachable. So the problems arise when the student's grade target is incompatible with their productivity beliefs or valuation of leisure or time constraints. So if the student slacks off, then we as educators might apply stricter grading to push them to study harder, and this might work, but only to a certain point. So at some point, when the students are already almost ready to give up, then raising the standard even further will essentially backfire. So extreme grades, extremely low grades, and extremely high grades are detrimental to student motivation. And also the data show that a growth mindset is conducive to learning, whereas a fixed mindset is detrimental. And intrinsic motivation plays a surprisingly important role, even in a grade-minded environment. And we need to further clarify it in future research. Finally, my main conclusion for the policy is that we need to talk about grading with our students to discover what time constraints or unrealistic goals or limiting beliefs hold them back, and how we can help them overcome those hurdles and become successful in their studies. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions. And I give the word back to the prorector of the session.
Thank you for your presentation. The opposition will be opened by Professor Dr. Bart Goldstein, who's a professor in Human Capital and Social Economics, and who was the chair of the assessment committee. The floor goes to Professor Goldstein.
Thank you. Dear candidate, dear Liudmila, first of all, congratulations on finishing your thesis. It contains 3 very well-written chapters on the interesting topic of the effects of grading on a variety of outcomes. The 3 chapters show that you are proficient in 3 key areas of economic research: empirical work with observational data, theoretical work, and laboratory experiments. I very much like how the chapters are related to each other and still can almost be read as separate papers. I say almost because chapter 3 is difficult to read without chapter 2. I also like your introduction and conclusion of the thesis with their historical perspectives on grading, and also nicely coined expressions like the zero motivation trap. Another remarkable feature of your thesis is that all chapters are single-authored. I would like to ask some questions about chapter 1. And so 3 questions. And the first is that you study the effect of grades on a variety of outcomes, like dropping out and choice of further course, subsequent course GPA, and thesis grade. And to do this, you use a random shock due to rounding in grade point average of master level students. This idea is very good because the shock is random, but as you point out, the shock is really small. We're talking here about a shock of around 0.003 points or 0.01 standard deviations. And that is hardly noticeable for a student, so I was actually surprised that you find any significant results. And that made me wonder why you didn't consider a larger shock. So when I give grades to students in my course, there are much larger shocks due to rounding. As you know, we have to round to half grades at Maastricht University. So my question is, why didn't you use the rounding effects on the final grade per course? Such data are available, for instance, at our school. That's question one. Then question two is looking at the main results in table 1.3 that reports the effects of the rounding on a variety of outcomes for a variety of groups. I see that you estimate 60 regressions, and around 12 of these regressions are significant. But as you mentioned in the text and also in your presentation now, some of these effects are chance findings. So I was wondering, and you say, okay, if I apply a Bonferroni test, then none of the results would have survived. But that is a very strict test, and I was wondering if you didn't try any more lenient tests to determine this. And the third question I have is, what can we learn from your results policy-wise? Should we only round up, or what should we do? I look forward to your answers.
Yes, dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your kind words and your very interesting questions. Answering your first question, yes, indeed, that's true. And at Maastricht University, there are bigger shocks to grading. And so I regret right now that I didn't start with Maastricht University data. But the data that I collected it in Hungary when I was staying in Hungary. And I collected it initially for studying peer effects. And then from studying peer effects, because it was very difficult to identify them, I switched to studying grading effects. That very much interested me. And so I already had those data in my hands, and that's why I decided to start with them and to see if anything shows up at all. But I completely agree with you that it would be a very nice reanalysis to collect Maastricht University data and to check, to pre-register everything, all the hypotheses, and then see if anything really shows up that is really significant and not like this preliminary analysis. Yes, I agree, and I would be happy to do that. And answering your second question, no, I didn't use any other lenient tests, more lenient tests to check, to correct for the data mining issues. When I looked at the Bonferroni correction, I already saw that nothing is really significant, and I was just, yes, I totally agree that it's, strictly speaking, there is nothing significant there. But these findings give us indication if something shows up as even as spuriously significant, then still maybe there is something there so that we can dig in that direction. Maybe we can discover something with these competitive international males. So these findings give us some indication of possibility of grading effects, but not really that we found them.
May I quickly interrupt you? Did you also consider extending the sample? Because you find a tiny effect, so you would expect that if you increase the sample size, then you might find more significant results.
Well, Actually, that would be practically very difficult to do because I would have to, again, go to that university and ask them for data, and it would take a lot of time, and maybe they would not support my request. So I didn't really consider that. And also because I realized that my results are very preliminary and only suggestive of so they only give suggestions for further research. So and answering your third question, policy-wise, so what should we do as educators? Well, yeah, so that's a very big question. So what should we do with grading? Because grading is so context dependent. So there are so many nuances in grading. So how do we optimize it? So there are myriad of nuances to think about actually. What I find in my research is the main conclusion that we have to be deliberate about applying this grading. So what do we want from our students when we apply this grading? And also what sense our students make of the grades they receive. So when they receive particularly low or very, very high grades and they get demotivated because of that, we need to talk with them about that, I think. And we need to help them correct their beliefs, maybe, if they are inadequate, and help them motivate them better.
Thank you very much. That's very clear.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Annelore Verhagen. She was also a member of the assessment committee, and she's a postdoctoral researcher at the Public Policy Institute of Paris School of Economics. The floor goes to Dr. Verhagen.
Thank you. Dear candidates, dear Liudmila, first of all, let me sincerely congratulate you on your dissertation. It's really a well-written and carefully structured thesis, and it is clear that a great deal of thought and effort has gone into every chapter. I especially want to commend you on the structure of your dissertation. And by combining observational data, theoretical modeling, and experimental evidence, you have constructed a coherent and multifaceted analysis. Each chapter stands on its own, and yet together they build a strong narrative about the complex and sometimes contradictory effects of grades. It is clear that you have engaged deeply with a long-standing and complex topic that touches on the foundations of education itself and the practice of grading. With that said, I would like to turn to some questions and reflections. I especially appreciated the way that you started your dissertation with the fundamental question, to grade or not to grade, because it invites the reader to reflect on the broader meaning and purpose of assessment in education. It suggests that the debate is not only about how and when to grade, but also about whether we should grade at all. Having read your work, I learned a lot about how and when to grade, but I'm left wondering about your view on the fundamental question itself, to grade or not to grade. So in your professional opinion, should we grade? In answering, I would like you to reflect on the advantages and disadvantages of grading or not grading at different levels of education. Because let me give you a concrete example. PhD candidates in Maastricht are not graded for their dissertation. There's only a pass-fail decision at the end. It's what we're doing here today. Yet people still finish their dissertations, even in the absence of the extrinsic motivation of grades. How would you explain this? And students are graded at every earlier stage of the education system, from pre-primary all the way until the master's level. But for some reason, we decide to stop grading for PhDs. So why do you think this non-grading is implemented in PhD programs specifically? Do we learn from your thesis that we would get better dissertations if we were to grade our PhD students? Thank you. I'm looking forward to your answer.
Dear esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your kind words and for your very interesting questions. Yes, to grade or not to grade, that is a big question. Well, what is my opinion about that? There is a nice alternative to grading, which is narrative evaluation that is being used at some universities in the United States. And I think that that it should be studied, so that we need research to assess whether narrative evaluation is better actually than the grades that we give to our students. So for example, we can assess the students' learning at the end of the program, both in the case of narrative evaluation and in traditional grading, and see which students learned more. And also, we also need to assess the students' well-being at the end of the programs. Because in my opinion, the grades are a source of huge stress to the students, and maybe their negative effects on the students' well-being are outweighing their positive effects on maybe on some motivation. So, about the PhD programs, well, I think we are still graded as PhD candidates, so we have this pass-fail that we need to pass this PhD defense. And also there is a distinction possibility, I think, that some students might hope to receive a distinction on their degree. So there is still some form of grading, I think, in that sense. But we are not graded continuously, like, although I think we are also graded continuously. We are given these evaluations at the end of each year. So our supervisors grade us how good we proceed in the program.
Do you think that maybe this largely absence of grading, like you say, you have distinction, but mostly there is no grades for the dissertations. Maybe it could select a specific type of student, and that this could be exactly what universities are aiming for?
Yes, it might be helpful, because if we were graded with some grades of from 1 to 10 on our defense, and this would be put on our degree, then this would probably be detrimental to very grade sensitive people, for whom it would be a shame to receive a degree with a grade of 6. So even if it is a PhD degree. So yes, this might be there might be some selection in this sense, yes. Yes. So it's good that we don't get such kind of grades, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, then let's move on for the opposition to Dr. Matthias Wieberl, who his expertise is in behavioral economics at this university. And the floor goes to Dr. Wieberl.
Yeah, dear Liudmila, also congratulations from my side on this dissertation. I'm especially happy because it concerns, questions of very high practical relevance, something that you cannot say of every PhD thesis that we read. And also because it gives me the opportunity to ask some questions I've always wanted to ask. So in that sense, I think it does the best that this dissertation can do. So my first question concerns the common practice at many universities, whether desired or not, basically that there are some first-year courses that effectively serve as a hurdle for the weaker students. And I happen to teach one of those courses that you also know, this economics and business course in the business program. You were also, I met you when you were a tutor in this course. So now, after all these years, I'm interested in what you think about this practice of having a course that kind of serves as an entry point in light of your findings. Yeah, and also maybe also in a broader context. Yeah, is it a good practice or should we change something? And basically, in your thesis, you mainly talk about, or you kind of assume, okay, that the student knows, okay, this is what I want to do. Yeah, but when we think about these entry courses, we often think, okay, maybe this is not the right course of study for the respective student. Yeah, maybe you can comment a bit on this as well. The second question that I have is, again, a very general one. And when I read the dissertation, I was struck that there is a large literature on grading, but it seems to be largely disconnected to another large literature, that's the literature on how to pay people. So why do we ask why grade, and why don't we ask why pay? Yeah? Could you generally reflect on this a bit? So what do you think is different about education and work? Yeah, and how, and maybe is this reflected in your model?
Dear esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your kind words and very interesting questions as well. Yes, I remember teaching your course on economics and business, and that was actually a very, very informative experience in terms of grading facts, because I taught that course in the second period, and I had for freshman students. So I had students who came to me with different first period results. And some of the students looked really depressed. So they were really unhappy, they were unmotivated, they were not participating. And I was wondering, like, what's going on with those students? And I talked with some of them, and some of them told me that they failed their first period courses. So it affected them dramatically. They lost motivation, they lost hope. And I remember I made an ad hoc intervention for those students. I sent them a link to the YouTube video where a rocket scientist explains how she progressed from being a failing student to a rocket scientist. So that initially she failed her mathematics courses, but then she managed to find a tutor and she invested a lot of effort. And finally she graduated with distinction and became a rocket scientist. So I sent this link to the students, and it had an amazing effect on their motivation, actually. So they suddenly started participating. They suddenly started being hopeful again. So, so I think this kind of intervention, which is a growth mindset intervention, basically, that we tell our students that if you can just try another learning strategy and apply more effort in the way that works for you, then you can actually achieve the results that you want, oftentimes. So I think that this kind of growth mindset interventions that cost us basically nothing, but they can have a dramatic effect on student effort. And also how to pay people versus how to grade them. Yes, so we can consider grades as payments that we give to our students, quasi-payments in some sense, that can be connected to their future, maybe job opportunities sometimes, and their admissions prospects for postgraduate studies. Well, actually, I didn't really think about this connection to the payment literature, but now I'm going to think about it. Thank you very much for this suggestion. Yes, I think that these fields can be really connected and that can be very productive. Thank you.
Can I do a very quick follow-up? So then let's maybe focus on just on the education literature. Yeah. So there's this, I mean, you also mentioned this in your thesis, this long battle on extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. Yeah. So I have the feeling that this field of education is much more loaded than this field of labor economics. So is there, I mean, when you were reading this literature, is there anything that struck you in that sense?
Sorry, can you clarify what do you mean by this?
So basically, I have the feeling that the debates are more fierce in the education literature. And I'm one of those questions that I've always wondered about is why is that the case? And I maybe you have an opinion on that.
Maybe because the population that we are dealing with is more vulnerable. So they are basically our children in some sense, and we want the best for them. So that is why we have to be very careful with how we give feedback to these vulnerable young people. Maybe that is why it is more important to discuss grading than something in the work literature. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
The opposition will be continued by Dr. Mariana Tavares. She's an assistant Professor in Economics and Statistics at Forward College. The floor goes to Dr. Tavares.
Thank you. Dear candidate, dear Liudmila, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this special moment and to read your thesis. I found it to be a well-structured and thoughtful piece of work. As someone who also conducts research in this field and is engaged in teaching in higher education, I read your thesis with great interest. I could clearly see connections with my own research, as well as with some challenges I have faced in my teaching practice. Setting aside the finer details, which maybe perhaps we can discuss in the future, who knows, even as co-authors, I would now like to raise a question for your consideration. My question is a three-part question related to whether it is possible to change one's worldview and belief system, namely when it comes to effort decisions. And if so, how? Let me elaborate. In the general discussion of your thesis, you suggest that educators should ideally engage with students individually, helping them align their goals, challenge inadequate beliefs, and interpret their results constructively. You also highlight the potential of AI-based tools to support this process and point to your recent work on growth mindsets and positive world assumptions as promising avenues for intervention. So here it goes, the first part of my question. Given the practical constraints of large class sizes, heavy teaching workloads, and the mixed evidence surrounding AI in education, how feasible is this solution of teachers individually engaging with students possible in practice? Beyond decreasing student-teacher ratios, what changes would be necessary to implement this solution effectively? For the second part, I would like to know whether your current research points educators and policymakers towards specific strategies for implementation. For instance, which concrete methods could educators already use today to help students overcome the hurdles you mentioned? Finally, in your opinion, to what extent do these challenges stem from the grade-minded environment? Thank you so much, and I look forward for your thoughts.
Dear esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your kind words. Very pleasant to hear. Answering your questions, yes, very interesting questions. Thank you very much. So how feasible it is to address these issues individually? Yes, I agree that we as educators might not find enough time to talk with every one of our students, especially in huge classes. Well, then in that case, we can talk with them as a group. So we can basically invite those students who failed the first exam, and we can sit with them and we can discuss their experiences openly. So what sense do they make of their results? How are they planning to recover their grades? What strategies are they planning to use? Because when students start talking about that, then they start learning from each other. So for example, one can say that I will study with a friend, and another will reply, oh, I want to study with you, let's do it together. So we can basically open up such conversations. I think such conversations can be very, very very helpful to the students, also because the student will see that their teacher actually cares for them and sees them as human beings, not as some mass that they are controlling. So this is an important component of intrinsic motivation, the feeling of relatedness to your teacher or to the peers. So we can do it that way, or again, we can just send them a short email. And I recently read a paper that was just published this year that an educator sent an email to all the students again, based on their first midterm results, a lot of students failed, so that the educator suggested several possible learning strategies that can improve their learning, and also suggested tutoring hours, office hours, something like that. And this also had a positive effect, especially on the first generation students, because the first generation students who basically lack this knowledge of how to survive in the college, so they are particularly vulnerable. So we can do it in multiple various ways. And also concrete methods, how to overcome those hurdles. Yes, so these can be concrete methods. And also, yes, these problems stem from the grade-minded environment. Yes, of course. So when the grades have this huge extrinsic value on the labor market, so our students start being obsessed with these grades, especially the German students, actually, in my experience. Whereas the Dutch students have this Zesjescultuur, so they are satisfied with a 6. Germans, my German students were never satisfied with anything lower than 9. So this becomes really kind of like an obsession. And I think this crowds out their intrinsic motivation, and we should, again, talk with our students about this. Like, why are they obsessing so much? Are there alternative ways of achieving their learning outcomes and their job market prospects, maybe? So, so yes, this stems from the grade-minded environment, yeah, in many countries. Thank you for your questions. Very interesting.
Thank you so much. So if I may, do you see the future of education moving into a different direction, maybe a joy of learning mindset?
Yeah, that would be an ideal situation. Yes, that's for sure. But the problem with that is that to develop our skills, we have to stretch ourselves. We have to apply effort. We have to do what we don't want to do. So we have to really work on ourselves. And we humans prefer joy and pleasure. So we don't actually want to work hard. So sometimes we have to be nudged. And sometimes grading can help us with that. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dear Liudmila, I congratulate you with your dissertation concerning the effects of grading on student motivation and study efforts. I really enjoy the variation of methods, which is applied econometrics, theory, but also lab experiments, which gives it a very complete insight into the effects of grading. Moreover, the topic is directly of interest to educators and policymakers, and making it also a very practically implementable thesis. I would like to ask you some questions about your model in chapter 2, and also some of the results in chapter 3. And so I would like to start with proposition 6. Students can be defined as people who don't know what they don't know. And so this, for me, kind of signals, there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of uncertainty when it considers the effects of grading on student motivation or student effort. And so indeed, I was kind of going into this thesis with the mindset it's going to be about risk, or maybe about risk preference. Of course, we share the same promoter, Thomas. And so you start chapter 2, indeed, with describing the model of Kang, a statistical model or stochastic model, where students maximize their expected utility. Also in your model, you state that students do not want to pass the exams on average, and they need to pass the exam for sure, exhibiting risk aversion. So with risk aversion, I kind of assume that there is some risk involved in the model. Moreover, in your model, there's the alpha and the beta, which are updated in period 2, for me implying that there's uncertainty, students selecting these alpha and betas from some prior distribution. However, then also on the same page 40, you state that your model is more deterministic, and you state, I quote, "You do not assume that the student wants to maximize their expected outcomes." So my first question is, can you explain to me more thoroughly what the role of risk is in your model? Is it deterministic, or is there actually some risk in the background, and how would you define it, or how would you explain it? And is it not ultimately a model in which the student is actually optimizing or maximizing expected utility? The second question is then, what do you think the role of risk aversion is in your model? what behavior would very risk-averse students given your model? And if not, could you maybe give a sketch of how this works in real life, where students are not, of course, before the grade comes, sure about the grade they're going to have?
Dear esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your kind words and very interesting questions. Yes, we have to deal with uncertainty. So our students have to deal with uncertainty because they cannot predict their grade even with any amount of effort. For example, the teacher can have some prejudice or bias and want to punish the student for something. So, so there is always uncertainty in grading, and so one way of dealing with this uncertainty is indeed to build a model of expected utility, so that the student might want to maximize the expected utility function. But again, grading is such a thing that it is really important to pass your exams, because you cannot proceed in your program if you fail them. So, so for that, the student wants to have certainty that this amount of effort that they apply will actually result in passing the exam, because otherwise they have wasted their effort, this enormous amount of effort. So again, remember that this is a model of extrinsic motivation. So the student doesn't derive any joy from learning. So they are studying something hard, something mandatory, and so this grading is designed to help the student get motivated to push through this. So, so the model assumes that the student actually tries to figure out how much effort is enough to pass the exam, how much effort is reasonably enough. Of course, there is no guarantee, but something like 99% sure, I don't know. So how much is just almost enough. So that's how I deal with this uncertainty in this model. So about the risk aversion. Yes. So my student in the model is risk averse. So they want to be more or less, to be almost sure that they will pass. Yeah. But of course, there are other modifications that are possible, such as the expected utility is also possible. But I think it is a bit less relevant here because of this risk aversion and the need to pass the exams, for sure.
Okay. Thank you. So maybe I can have a short follow-up question. So in this third chapter, you state that essentially intrinsic motivation plays a role because of the fact that students that have very high expected grades, you do not expect them to provide any effort, right? Because they're pretty sure on passing anyway. And also students with very low expectations, they also shouldn't provide any effort because they're sort of not going to pass anyway. So there's this reference point of a grade of 6, passing or not passing. So again, if I think about risk, couldn't it be the case that in this period too, there's still risk and uncertainty, right? Students in the second period, your subjects in the experiment, they still don't know exactly what's going to happen in the second period. So could it be that they're actually, because of this risk, still providing costly effort, hence to be completely sure that they'll pass, or even if you're below the reference point, and they're still providing costly effort, just have a small chance of winning, because they're in the loss domain. And so if this is the explanation, do you agree with this type of explanation? And then do you also agree that that actually your results can still be explained by extrinsic motivation and not intrinsic motivation?
Yes. So basically, so how do I discover the signs of possible intrinsic motivation? Here is that when the students get very, very high grades, even a grade of yes, so even with a grade of 10, they can still fail to a grade of 1 and then get a 5.5, which means below 6. Yes, there is still possibility that they can fail. So they will apply effort, absolutely. but the effort is multidimensional here. So it is the training effort, memorization effort, the effort on the exam. So they apply various kinds of effort. What I distinguish here is how much training they buy. And if they buy 60 seconds of training after getting a grade of 10, this is really really unreasonable. Like, you really don't need to train that hard. You have to be paranoid about getting a grade of 1 to buy so much training, because you can always buy 40 seconds of training or 20 seconds of training with such a high grade. And also for students with a grade of 1, this is really interesting, because there is no possibility for recovering for them. Even with a grade of 10, they will not recover to a grade of 6. And yet what I find in my data, there are 11 such students, including both students who trained and who didn't train in the first period. 11 students got a grade of 1. Out of them, 5 students bought training in the second period. For what? So this is absolutely unreasonable. So this cannot be explained by extrinsic motivation. They could not recover their GPA, and still they went for it. So to me, it is a sign of probably intrinsic motivation. So they did it because they enjoyed it. They just wanted to see how far they can improve from this grade of 1, but not out of extrinsic motivation, because it was already gone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
This concludes our first round, and we can now move into a second round. And it's a custom at this university that those who come from further away get the floor first in this second round. So I'm moving immediately to Dr. Verhagen. The floor is yours.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, so I just asked a question about to grade or not to grade, but let me move to the question to round or not to round then, by asking a question about chapter 1. Where you examine the effects of a very small shock in academic grades, and to do so you compare those whose GPA was rounded upwards to those whose GPA was rounded downwards. You exclude the students whose grades were not rounded at all, noting that they showed some significant differences from the 2 rounded groups. But this makes it also very difficult to conclude, should grades be rounded or not? Because when you find negative coefficients, are those a negative effect of upward rounding or a positive effect of downward rounding? Moreover, in table 1.2, you show that there are also some significant differences between the 2 rounded groups. And you largely take care of them by adding controls in your regressions, but it makes me wonder why you couldn't also just have adopted a similar strategy to deal with the differences with the non-rounded groups. So have you tried including the non-rounded group to see how their outcomes compare? And based on not just chapter 1, but your entire dissertation, how would you reflect on the question whether grades should be rounded or not? Thank you.
Dear esteemed opponent, thank you very much for these very interesting questions. Well, I didn't compare the students with already round GPA values to those whose grades were technically rounded, because those were not very comparable comparisons. But actually, I might think about doing it, and I might think about controlling for everything that I can control, and also excluding, let's say, straight A students, which are very much atypical, and or straight fail students, things like that, and then maybe deal with the problem of how many courses they took. Because the more courses they took, the more rough their GPA becomes, and then happens the rounding. So yes, I will think about it, how to do this. Thank you very much for this suggestion. And to round or not to round? Well, so you mean that, well, if we don't round, then we actually provide the students with some very raw number, something
Yeah.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
On the transcript,
Yeah, why not?
yeah, but
Why do we round at all?
yeah, but those very many numbers basically don't make much sense. They're just like an ornament, so it's probably not very informative.
Isn't the entire idea of chapter 1 that it does matter?
Well, the idea of chapter 1 is to assess the difference in the students' learning outcomes when their GPAs are marginally higher versus lower. So to assess the impact of the shift of the academic standard, even though it is really tiny and almost nothing. So it was not really about the impact of rounding. But to round or not to round, I didn't even think about this question before, but I will think about this. Thank you. That's an interesting idea.
Okay, thank you.
Just to follow up on it, is Dr. Tavares still interested in having a question?
Why not?
Okay, go ahead.
So, dear candidate, your thesis examines also the motivational effects of grading, an external incentive, in the education setting. You also touch on how students' effort decisions can be influenced, which is very much close to my own research. So, building on these insights, particularly on motivation and effort decisions in general, do you see your work being applicable to fields beyond education? If so, which ones would be more interesting, more promising, and what research questions might such an extension of your work help us explore?
Dear esteemed opponent, thank you very much for this very insightful question. Yes, I think that the findings from the theoretical model can also be applied to other contexts, to the context where people have some artificial incentives, artificial rewards that they can reach when they apply effort, and they also receive in the process of reaching those rewards, they receive some feedback from their supervisors, for example, and that feedback can affect their self-beliefs about their productivity. For example, in sports, this can be applicable. So how do we train sportsmen to become Olympic champions, for example? Yes, it might be applicable to other contexts as well, and I think it needs some further investigation. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I look forward for your future thoughts on this then.
Thank you so much, Marianne.
Okay, well, now we move back to Professor Goldstein, if he would still like to have a question or an issue that he would like to address with the candidate.
Yes, sure. So one of my questions is still that you find in chapter 1 that the effects of the merit international students are very large. If they had more favorable rounding, they had 6 percentage points lower probability of defending a thesis and 12 percentage points lower probability of defending an excellent thesis. And they dropped out at a 3 percentage points higher rate. And these effects are really huge for such a tiny treatment. And I was wondering whether you can explain these or what your explanation would be for these huge effects.
Yes, dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for this question. Yes, the estimated effects are huge, but they are also imprecisely estimated. So there are also huge standard errors, especially due to data mining issues. And I was also thinking about applying clustering, for example, at the class level, and then the standard errors will be even much bigger, and everything will probably lose significance. So that these estimates are imprecisely estimated, and so I'm not making much sense out of them. What I find is that there appears some kind of a possible effect and indication of it, and so that we can dig deeper into that particular population to find if something is really significant and important.
Right. So you think it's a chance finding,
Yes,
basically.
might be,
Yeah.
of course, a chance finding. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ora asked.
Well, that concludes the hour that we have for this looking and discussing at your dissertation, and then rounding it all up after several interesting questions and your response to it. So, Liudmila Galiullina, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed, and the degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and the quality of your defense. And I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return. Thank you.
You are still muted.
The fact that we are back so quickly may be indicative, but that's not for me to conclude. The RE committee here present online has assessed the quality of your thesis and the quality of your defense, and in view of its positive verdict and taking into account all your previous qualifications, the RE committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Domen is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom, and I invite your supervisor to now take the floor. Professor Domen.
Yes. Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
Then, by the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present online, I hereby confer upon you, Liudmila Galiullina, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, you will soon receive the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the supervisor, affixed with the official seal of the university, shown by the beadle now. Dr. Galiullina, congratulations. Liudmila, great job. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations. The floor goes to Professor Borghans, who will do the laudatio. Professor Borghans.
Dr. Galiullina, dear Liudmila, congratulations. 10 years ago, you started the journey of writing a PhD thesis in Maastricht. After an impressive route of studies at Kama State Polytechnic, St. Petersburg State University, and the European University at St. Petersburg and the European University at Prague, and in the Max Planck School in Jena, while in between working as a math or econ teacher and researcher, shows that Liudmila has a lot of perseverance. We remember from our first meeting with Liudmila that she came in with a mix of quiet shyness and determination. She was unmistakably convinced of what she wanted to share. She carried a block of paper and a pencil. What struck us most was her handwriting, so neat, so clear, written in pencil, almost as if it had been printed. She laid out her thoughts on that piece of paper. As usual, we were talking a lot, circling around possibilities and trying to make sense of what she was proposing. Whenever we seemed to have grasped something, or when our thoughts aligned, she would quietly say, yes, sometimes even yes, yes. We don't remember her ever saying no. Instead, if something wasn't quite right, she would simply explain it again, trying out slightly different versions until her idea landed more clearly. That combination of quietness and persistence made a deep impression on us. She was also very determined about the topic she wanted to research. To what extent does the grading of a teacher affect the future motivation of a student to put effort in their study? We still remember well one of the first versions of the theoretical model that is now chapter 2 in the thesis. She drew 2 pictures on the paper herself, one of a very nice, friendly teacher and one of a very terrifying, strict teacher. The basic idea that she wanted to investigate was simple. For the same work, a student could get a higher grade from the nice teacher or a lower grade from the strict teacher. If you think of it as something random, whether you get the nice or the strict teacher, how does this affect the expectations and motivation of the student? For Thomas and me, the paradox of Liudmila was that on the one hand, she is the type of person that never gives up, while on the other hand, she was determined to study where the grading of a teacher could make you give up. This was not just an academic question to her, but the self-drawn pictures of on the paper showed that it was really a topic to her heart. We now know that statistically it is not easy to answer this question, but in a very creative way, Liudmila managed to collect data and to set up a lab experiment to investigate this question. It took some time to finish the thesis, but again showed your perseverance. Meanwhile, Liudmila also obtained a bachelor degree in psychology. Dear Liudmila, Thomas and I want to congratulate you with this PhD, and we hope that you will keep going with the same perseverance. We wish you all the best in your future as a doctor in economics.
Thank you very much.
Dear Dr. Galiullina, also on behalf of the Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree you have acquired. And I'm happy to give the floor to also the other members of the degree committee for congratulations. Shall we start with Professor Goldstein?
Yeah, congratulations, Liudmila. Very well done. And a beautiful thesis and a beautiful future ahead. Wish you all the best.
Okay, Dr. Wagen.
Congratulations, Dr. Galiullina. Really well done. I'm very happy to see you also again. It's been a while. And even more happy in this context and with such a nice outcome. Well done.
Very much.
Yeah, also from my side, congratulations. You can be very proud that you made it. Yeah, as I read this thesis, I thought back about the time when I saw you started it. I think it really shows the way that you have come. Yeah, and so I hope you also enjoyed the way